6:30 CHED Afternoons with Jaylen Nye. Weekdays at 2 on 6:30 CHED.
Looking for some honesty from you now this afternoon. In a typical workday, how many breaks do you take? And be honest here. Add it up. How many minutes are you not actually doing your job while you're at your job? Okay, I put together a mini list off the top of my head. It took me about 6 minutes to come up with all of these things, each and every one of these distractions. So there's this lunch, of course, takes you away from work. There's getting a couple of cups of coffee during the day. There's topping up that water bottle you have a few times every day. There's chatting with your colleagues about what they did last weekend. There's asking a different colleague how their vacation was. If you smoke, there's going for a cigarette a couple times each and every day. There's also, checking Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. There's texting with your partner about an idea for dinner tonight. There's texting with your sister because you're in a fight over something. Your mom is now calling you during the workday, probably wanting to know when you're going to call her back. Your buddy is sending you the latest meme about your favorite movie. And then your sports team makes a big trade, so you have to go check out all the details. And, you have to register your daughter for swimming lessons before all of the best time slots fill up. Yeah, the list of distractions, or what's also known as breaks from your workday, it goes on and on. That was me being a little bit honest right there with you. Lots and lots of distractions, more than we realize, right? More than you realize. And with so many people working remotely now, there are even more distractions at home. So with that in mind, we're turning to Spencer O'Leary this afternoon. Spencer is CEO of ActiveOps North America. ActiveOps is a company that specializes in management process automation. Spencer, welcome to The Drive today.
Hi, Ted. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah. Did you hear that list I went through, Spencer? Those are my distractions in a typical day, because a lot of people get distracted at work regularly, don't they?
They do, part of normal working life, and working life changed for a lot of people in 2020, and working life went home. So there's a different set of distractions. Some of them similar, but certainly a different, probably a greater set that most people experience today.
Yeah, no kidding. And statistically, have you crunched numbers at all to find out how many minutes per day or perhaps hours per day employees lose to these distractions?
We have. So at ActiveOps, we produce a solution, a piece of software that measures what people do and how they interact with their computer, whether they're working at their home or whether they're working in the office. And we produce data that shows exactly when employees are being productive working on the bank or insurance company systems, depending on what job they do, and what time they're spent either away from their desk or at their desk and being inactive. So yes, we have lots of data about those particular distractions as they happen in the day.
Okay, and do you, I'm just curious, do you get the data for when somebody's logged in but not at their computer just by the lack of activity, that type of thing, and the software measures that?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So we're monitoring everything that happens on a PC, logged in, logged out, logged in and not doing anything. As soon as the thing goes to sleep, we're monitoring all of those things. And this change from when people worked in the office and had a set of distractions, and now they work at home and have a set of distractions, there's some real anomalies in the data that people start to analyze and sometimes truly misunderstand in terms of what's done. So some research out in the last week has suggested some employees are spending up to 3 hours a day on these unintentional breaks. Now, whilst that's true, and we've got data to prove it, one of the things we found when everybody went to work at home is that the average working day of each employee increased greatly.
Really?
During the early part and through the pandemic. So people weren't doing their sort of 7 or 7.5 hours in the office and taking maybe a couple of hours of these unintentional breaks. The unintentional breaks had increased, but people's working days were 7, 8, 9 hours, and sometimes over a 11 or 12-hour elapsed period. They've got times of the day where they interacted with the kids or aging parents or whatever it was, and just the shape of the working day really changed. And that's been a really interesting data point that we've been analyzing over the past 18 months.
I bet. We're talking with Spencer O'Leary this afternoon, CEO of ActiveOps in North America, about managing teams and managing employees remotely. And what are some tips then, Spencer, and best practices that, we can give for, employees and employers with respect to, cutting back on the breaks and maybe shortening the workdays to what were normal?
And I think there's a new phrase that's coming out in business of hybrid work. It's this idea of having people work at home for a certain number of days in the week and then working in the office for other days. And our data proves people actually produced more output for the hours they worked when they worked at home than worked in the office. A startling statistic for many. But when they're working from home, a couple of other things really suffered. Creativity suffered, ideas generation, also employee well-being. There's lots of studies out at the moment to say employees are struggling with work-life balance, and poor employee well-being equals workplace stress, equals sickness and attrition, and some horrible things that people experience. So 3 things for me today, for any employer listening or any employee listening, to make sure that they encourage their employer to do. The first is data. It's really hard to manage a hybrid or remote workforce if you haven't got good data. That's why people invest in things like the ActiveOps solution. Second is that data needs to be balanced. Don't just focus on production and output. You need to focus on input. How many hours are people spending doing the work that you want them to get done? So performance and well-being are absolutely key. And the third is make sure you're in control. It's a really hard job to make sure you've got enough people to do the work or enough work to keep the people busy. But if you're not in control of those 2 different moving beasts, then you're creating this stressful burnout environment where people will start to take more breaks and go off sick and maybe even change jobs. So focus on those 3 things, and we can all manage better in this new hybrid world.
In your opinion, Spencer, last question this afternoon. In your opinion, is the hybrid work model the most successful then to, bring some collaboration, creativity back up? And, because it was down, you were saying, with people working at home, and bringing productivity back in line with what was kind of normal with the offices, but also getting more production out of people when they're at home. Is that hybrid model the best way, do you think, coming out of the pandemic here?
So I'll answer that question in 2 ways. I think it's the best way to get the best out of people, both their performance and their well-being, in the situation we find ourselves. And that situation we find ourselves in is a power struggle that's ended with the employee. And there are so many open jobs in the US today that if somebody can't offer what's right for the employee, this balance of working at home and working in the office, then that employer is really going to struggle to retain and attract good talent, because those employees will walk and they'll go and find an organization to work for who can. So yes, I think it's the best we've got to offer, this hybrid work at home and get the work done, come to the office and collaborate and innovate. But it's the best we've got with the hand that we've been dealt, and what we've got to deal with in this new strange time.
Interesting. Thanks for your input this afternoon, Spencer. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ted.